All right, welcome back to the Ottawa studios of Inside My Canoe Head. I am your host, Dr. D. Today, part 2 of your roadmap to resilience. This is all about responsibility for your world. So sit back, grab yourself your favorite beverage. Let's get at her. Who doesn't love a great drum beat? I know, seriously. Thank you for joining us again on this second episode dedicated to the roadmap to resilience. First episode, hopefully you had an opportunity to read that or listen to it. If you didn't, hop back and listen to that one first. This one will make a little bit more sense. Either way, welcome. Thanks for joining us here at Inside My Canoe Head. We appreciate your ongoing support. If you drop over to our website, www.insidemycanoehead.ca, it takes you to our Buzzsprout support site. And all there is the episodes and everything, the link to our social media. And down the bottom, there's this little heart button. You can hit that and buy me a coffee. But today, what we're trying to achieve, the goal and our intent of the roadmap to resilience is to lay out what zero-cost force multiplier things you can choose to do that's grounded in the evidence and research as we understand it today that will lead to you having better post-event outcomes, right? Because we all live in a chaotic, economically stressed society. It is illogical for me to tell you, here's a list of things to do, and it costs you about $1,000 a family. There are people out there selling you that stuff. They're all over YouTube. They'll say, oh, by the way, these 5 things I think are really helpful. And if you go into the description of the video, there's an affiliate link where I can make a small amount of money, blah, 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 blah. Now you understand the rationale of what you're telling you. We're simply offering here at Preparedness Labs Incorporated, which is the parent company of the podcast, that we have non-apocalyptic, evidence-based preparedness education for rational people. Right? This is our free community service to the world, and we're developing this roadmap. And as we release it, it's released as a Substack article for those who want the written form, and it's available up on the Substack under Jeff Donaldson as well. And the link is on our website, www.preparednesslabs.ca. On top of that, you have this awesome, incredible podcast that's downloaded in 111 countries, well over 30,000 downloads, 340 plus episodes. And for those that prefer the visual medium, I do a one-take conversation with you about this topic on our YouTube channel at Preparedness Lab. So whichever medium you choose to consume this in, it's there. It's going to be a 5-part series and very simple steps that you can do irrespective of your socio-economic condition, irrespective of you being a member of a vulnerable or marginalized community, including everybody. You can do this, and it's there for you. It's free of charge, and I actually don't sell this in any way, shape, or form. I don't make any ad revenue. It is there for free. So just to kind of bring us up to speed, what we did and what we offered in part 1 was simply that for the frame of disasters, you live in a modern technologically enabled society. You're probably listening, the majority of people listen to this podcast on a handheld computer, otherwise known as a smartphone, magically connected through the air to some tower that's allowing this to happen, right? So the society in which you live is enabled by 10 sectors of critical infrastructure. Each one of those have elements. There's about 40 systems that underpin the ongoing operation of society. An emergency is when you lose access to one of those. Now, what an emergency is defined is going to be different for everybody, because I may or may not have a strong dependence on or a significant exposure to that part of critical infrastructure, and you do. So losing it causes you a significant emergency, and to me, it's really a nominal or non-event. Couldn't care less, right? So when we understand that, and then we understand the frame of critical infrastructure, we then move on to the second part. Then we talked about the role that government has in emergency management, both incident response, which we're all used to, police, fire, and EMS, and the function of emergency management, which is incident management, the backgrounds, EOC, supporting political decisions, and all the really challenging professional work done in the background to think about the next 24 or next 48 hours. How do we manage and bring all of society to bear to help our residents in an emergency? That has a very real function, but often what happens in society is that there is an exceptional gap that exists between the expectations of society as to what the government is capable of doing and what they can actually deliver in times of an emergency. So what that creates, it's called a hazard-induced preparedness gap. So there's needs induced because of the emergency that happened, but the government can't fill it all. And so people are left without their needs being met. That's a preparedness gap. The preparedness gap is the purpose of this roadmap to resilience. It's what we're trying to train you and give you the education so that you, on your own, in your community, with your neighbors and your family, you're able to close that gap. So on today's episode, we're going to talk about the first part of you accepting responsibility for your outcomes, accepting responsibility for yourself, and then we're going to give a quick little fun description of how we classify and codify what preparedness looks like in society and what are the 5 types of preparedness that exist in a modern Western society. So first of all, when we look at responsibility for your outcomes, we talk about Stoic philosophy a lot on this podcast, and it basically means there's a dichotomy of control. And that's simply put that absolutely everything that happens in the world, you either control or you don't. And you control actually very few, and that is precisely enough. And it means you have the ability to control what you say, both in a verbal and a written sense, and you have control over your physical actions that you do. Absolutely everything else that happens around you in the world is a function of somebody else's words or somebody else's actions, and you have very little to no influence over that around you. But what you do have absolute control over is how you choose to respond to the events initiated by somebody else that cause you harm or cause a disruption in your life. So if you think about, you can't control political or economic fights or harm, but what you can do is figure out ways that you can navigate the harm and the difficulty caused to you in your life by political decisions, right? So the Stoic philosophy is grounded very much in that, right? We're simply trying to offer to you that what you need to accomplish is to accept the fact that you control what you say and what you do, and that if you assume responsibility for that, you assume responsibility for your outcomes. And that means that while you understand, as we talked about in step 1, that emergency management as a function and the government as a function will try to ameliorate a situation or within a disaster, but that they have very real limitations and they have capability stops where they can't simply continue to provide service. So there'll be situations where, for example, you'll call 911 and nobody will be there. And even if the operator answers, there's absolutely nobody to respond to your call. Or in a disaster, there may be significant problems that are ongoing. The government's trying to deal with them, but they're so fast and overwhelming that it is overwhelming their capability to respond. The personal responsibility simply means that it is your role as a leader. Now, a leader for yourself, maybe a leader for a family, a leader in your community, a leader in your faith group, whatever that may be, but taking a leadership role means you are accepting responsibility. And it means success or failure, it will be your fault, right? Whether you win or lose in a hockey game is your fault. And the best way to look at it is if your sports analogy is a golfer, right? Every golfer in a tournament is playing in the very same conditions on the very same set of holes in mostly the same meteorological conditions, right? So if he wins or if she loses dramatically, it will be that person's fault. Personal responsibility from your outcomes accepts that is. Going forward from this point forward, you realize that if you're going to be successful and if you're going to be ready and you want to be ready to navigate a significant disruption, an emergency, a disaster, or an exogenous shock beyond your control that impacts you, your family, and your interest in how you conduct your affairs, then it is you that's going to have to take responsibility for that, because the real and actual limitations of the government don't allow them to do that for you. That is simply the question. if you want to accept responsibility for your outcomes, if you want to improve your ability to navigate this, then listen on. And we've always said, if you don't want to accept responsibility, what you're saying is it's somebody else's job to save you. It is somebody else's role to come give you needs, to fill your needs when you can no longer fill your own needs. And what happens is, when a significant disruption or an emergency eventually does happen, because it eventually happens to every one of us at some time or another, you will suffer, and those for whom you're responsible will suffer because you don't have the ability to cover. It's simply asking the question, do you want to assume responsibility for your outcomes? If the answer is yes, then the next thing that we have to look at is yourself. And this is humility and grace. This is looking at yourself in the mirror, both in a figurative and a literal sense, and saying, I am responsible and I have a duty to be the best person I can so that when an emergency happens, I am best positioned to launch and deal with it. You have control over your physical, mental, and financial health, right? That's nobody else's responsibility but yours. You control whether you're physically fit or not. You control whether you're mentally fit or not, and you control whether you're financially fit or not, right? And we offer to you that starting a no-notice, rapid onset disaster and emergency when you're unfit, stressed to the nines, and broke is not a recipe for success. That is putting yourself and your family at, we would argue, and I argue, at undue risk. Now, the fact that you may be unfit, this is a humility and grace. And I say this with love and affection for yourself. Look at yourself in the mirror. This is about accepting, I'm here. It doesn't matter while I'm here. It doesn't matter whose responsibility, but from this point forward, I'm going to figure out how to take control of my physical fitness, my mental health and my mental stability, and my financial health. And this is where you look out. And on the internet, from reputable sources, is all the information you need to do that. You don't have to hire a professional if you don't have the money or you don't want to expend the money. The same amount of advice is available. Seek it out. Seek it from reputable sources. I've written a book with my steps that I follow in that, and the steps that I did and the steps that work for me as to how to do it. And I've done a couple of podcasts on this before. And I decided to take control of my physical health. I decided to take control of my mental health, and I decided to take control of my financial health. The reality of this journey for everybody is that it's not quick, right? You are not going to make an overnight success. You are not going to change. You have to think in months, if not years, for getting yourself physically healthy, for dealing with any mental health stress, trauma that you have in your life and working through and solving that. You have to, you may be in a significantly bad financial state, right? But this is about having grace, saying, I'm not going to repeatedly punch myself in the mirror because I'm broke. I'm going to figure out, how do I get from broke to financially stable over the next couple of years? A guy like Dave Ramsey has his baby step program. If you do nothing else, just Google Dave Ramsey baby steps. 7-step program, follow it, and you're golden, and you will have financial freedom for the rest of your life. It takes time, but it's a very simple step. For physical fitness, what do? And these guys, don't sue them, don't go after them, but it's Nerd Fitness. I go online, Nerd Fitness. It's all the body movement and exercise stuff that you need to build a fit and healthy human body without spending any money whatsoever. Mental health, it's a little bit more challenging. I've worked through my own problems and issues with that, so I'm not going to pretend to be an expert. I'm an expert on a survivor perspective, but I'm most certainly not an expert to tell you what to do. But that is available free of charge through reputable sources. It's a journey you start. It is a journey that you begin by accepting responsibility for your outcomes, realizing that the best asset you have in an emergency is you, and therefore you have a duty to get your physical, mental, and financial health as healthy as possible, right? So you set yourself on a long-term, might be multiple year, but you set yourself on a pathway and a roadmap from where you are now to where you want to be in a physical, mental, and financial sense. So when you do that, for me, it was overnight, the weight off my shoulders was huge, but that was more to me realizing that blaming everything but me, or even beating myself up in the mirror about the fact that I was fat and stressed to the nine, it accomplished nothing. Absolutely nothing. It just sent me to more Cheerios boxes and donuts and crumble cookies, but I love my crumble cookies, dear Lord. But the point being is that you can do that, but you have to do it on your own. And it's not an overnight thing. It's a successive thing, and it's best done supporting in a network of support people with the people you love, your friends, your family, your faith community, the wider community, your neighborhood, gathering together to realize we need to be on a journey, and you have a duty to yourself, if you want to accept responsibility for your outcomes, to be best suited to do that. That's your journey you're on. That's the main issue of part 2. But what we wanted to offer you to close out part 2 of your roadmap to resilience is understand, what are we trying to get to in the world of preparedness, right? We're accepting responsibility for our outcomes. We've decided to start the journey to get healthy and physical, mental, and psychological health, and our financial health. But what are we trying to achieve? So when we look at the world around us, we've done some research here at Preparedness Labs Incorporated. Basically, it's a summative of 12 years. As an individual, as Dr. D, I've been studying individual preparedness at the person and family level for at least a dozen years now, well over a decade. And I've written hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, probably close to 1,000 pages of published work on individual emergency preparedness and preparedness at the family level, starting to work in the community, but my real expertise and grounded in that. And so when I looked at that, I figured, okay, I have to figure out a way to codify the different levels of society, right? The different types of society. And so what we did is we looked at it from a capability perspective, right? Because there's a lot of beliefs in the preparedness community. There's a lot of opinions. There's a lot of labels. If I throw out the word prepper and survivalist and 72 hours, I mean, there's a whole bunch of connotations around that type of label that is just grounded in personal opinion and belief. And frankly, as I've said before, as a scientist, I couldn't give two craps what people's belief or opinion is, because that's pointless if you're a scientist. What I'm looking at is, what does the evidence show us? So we built this, not quite a Likert scale, if you know what that is, but more of a division or a categorization based upon a capability to manage that preparedness gap for loss of CI, as we talked about in step 1. Remember, we're grounding this all in research, so it has to make logical sense. So the 5 we come out with are the following. Number 1, my friends, is you're blissfully unaware. These are simply those wonderful folks that really have made the conscious decision not to make a decision. They live day to day. They live in the present. They don't worry about tomorrow. They don't care about tomorrow. There are 2 grounds to why they think this way. 1, they have a lack of self-confidence in their ability to handle anything anyhow, so they don't believe they have the personal ability to prepare. So as a result of a really low self-confidence, these people just live blissfully unaware. They pay no attention. It's almost the blinders are on, and they're just trying to deal with what's in front of them. They don't care, and they don't pay attention to anything else. The other side of the blissfully aware is those small portion of the population that have an outsized, unjustified level of self-confidence in their ability to handle absolutely anything. So they don't need to be prepared because they're so incredibly smart and capable that no matter what happens to them, they're a MacGyver. If you're old enough to remember that reference, they just pop up and they can deal with anything, figure their way out, and they'll get on with it. Those are your blissfully aware people, and these individuals will need immediate assistance as soon as a significant event happens. The next group are your government dependent, the 72-hour folks. These are the individuals who are compliant. They've listened to the government messaging. They've decided that they will adopt, they believe it to be trustworthy and accurate. And so they've built their emergency kits and they're ready to hang out in their house and be a professional victim for 72 hours, because after that time, the benevolent government will come rescue them. They believe that the government will be there to provide for whatever needs they have after 72 hours, and that the government has the capability and capacity to execute that. So they're very good at the first 72 hours, but this group of people will need some type of external support past the 72 hours. The next category is what we refer to as the prepared individual. And this is a person who understands the role of emergency management and government in response and disaster operations, but they also understand the preparedness gap. They see that there is in reality a space that exists for hazard-induced needs that, irrespective of the great intentions and wonderful professionals in the EM field, they simply won't be able to assist. And that at 72 hours, the government is likely not to be there to meet all of your needs and even some specific needs. And therefore, it is their duty and responsibility to maintain a capability longer than that. Now, in general, the prepared individual is capable of self-sufficiency to some degree, close to, but it's never at, but it's close to near normal of pre-event conditions to support themselves and those for whom they're responsible for a period up to 14 days. So the prepared individual will need assistance after 14 days of an emergency. The next group is the prepper, the much maligned, misunderstood group of individuals who take preparedness as a significant portion of their lives. Now, some go really crazy, but I actually know a few preppers who spend very little time on it. But the reason we define preppers differently is we look at the prepper as an individual who believes that there will be a significant disruption. There's a likelihood of a significant disruption, just like the prepared individual, and that they believe that there will be a preparedness gap and a needs vacuum that the government won't be able to fill. So like a prepared individual, the prepper is able to replicate elements of the critical infrastructure for a period of time. The difference is the prepper looks out months. The prepper, to some degree, is able to replicate most of, if not all of the sectors of critical infrastructure for months. So they can generate their own power. They can generate their own fresh water. They have access to food storage or food growing capability past many months. And all the other sectors of critical infrastructure that are necessary, more like your animalistic requirements that we'll talk about in step 3 when it comes to your shelter and your trifecta of preparedness plans. When we think about that, preppers are people who are able to basically be self-reliant and self-sufficient for a period out months. Now, the difference between them and survivalists, which is our 5th and final category, is that survivalists are individuals who believe all the same things the prepared individual does and believe the same things as the prepper, except the survivalist has a frame where they believe that it is likely that this disruption will last longer than months and that they are prepared and believe that it is probable that the government will not return to normalcy, that the government will not restore the world to normalcy, and some new form of governance and societal organization will emerge. So what a survivalist frames on is they can replicate sectors of the CI for extended periods of time, like the prepper, except theirs is permanent. So they have a permanent ability to replicate power. They have a permanent ability to be able to provide for all their own nutrition and fresh water needs and medical needs, etc. They've looked at all of the animalistic requirements and the parts of preparedness that are necessary for sustained human life. And they've decided that they're going to replicate those and be able to provide those for the people and for whom they're responsible on a permanent basis, right? So if you think about the 5, from the blissfully unaware to the government dependent, the 72-hour folks, to the prepared individual, to the prepper and survivalist, you want to reflect on where you might sit. Now, the majority of people out there in the population are somewhere between blissfully unaware and the government dependent 72-hour folks. There is a small but notable part of the population who lives in the prepared individual, and there are a small number, unknown, because in Canada and the United States of America, there isn't really sufficient research to try to codify what the number of preppers and the number of survivalists that exist. We have some doomsday prepper shows, and there's channels and YouTube channels about them. So it sounds like they're far more frequent than they actually are. But the answer to the question is we don't know. We don't know because, number one, there isn't a homogeneous definition on what a prepper is. Like, I've used my definition using the frame of capability. Other people define prepper differently. So if we can't determine and agree at least on a reasonably common definition of a prepper, it's very difficult to then go out and try to measure in society what the prevalence and the frequency of this is within our towns, cities, and rural areas. So from that perspective, we simply don't know, but this is a frame through the state, through using capabilities, that you can look at and determine. And a lot of it lies on the timeline. And unapologetically, it's built that way for the intent, because the timeline is a measurable tool, right? I can measure how long you're prepared for. I can measure what capabilities you have, and then I can classify you in some type of categorized label, which is helpful when you're doing research in different areas to do some type of comparison, right? So the timeline is unapologetic. It's there intently. So, if I was to ask the question, and all of this started, and I'll give you a big backstory before we close here. I added a question halfway through at the very end of my master's thesis, my master's research. When I was doing research into small non-corporation small businesses in rural areas and their level of preparedness, basically a business continuity examination, I wanted to understand whether there was a correlation between how prepared the business was and how prepared the employees was. So I did a small 36-person study, and the question that I asked was, if I shut off your access right now, where you live, how you live, and with whom you live, and I shut off your access to all of your utilities, how long before you have to come out of your front door and ask for assistance? Simple question. Food, water, shelter, health, safety, and security. At what point, how many days and timeline would you be able to last on what is in your home right now before you have to come out and ask for assistance? And it was basically, now, like nothing. I need help right away. 48 hours, 72 hours, a week, a month, 6 months, or more. And I got some interesting answers. 36 survey questions are not going to give you a statistically significant answer as that's generalizable to the rest of the population, right? And generalizable means I can simply pick it up and drop it and expect the same type of results. It's not that way. But what it did is that was the key that opened the entire rest of my desire to understand resiliency through the lens of understanding individual preparedness levels. Because when I got all these answers, the majority of people sat around 72 hours, 48 to 72 hours. And then there was one individual who said, forever, I'm good. Why would I need the government? Why would I need anybody else's assistance to feed me, to house me, to, basic medical stuff? I can do all that on myself, and my family's quite fine, thank you. And I would think, that's not a normal response in a modern urban society. Of course, we need grocery stores and doctors' offices and everything else under the sun. And then this individual was like, no, why would I want to have myself relying on something I don't control? And it was that attitude that got me thinking about this whole thing. So hopefully this part 2 of the Roadmap to Resilience, following up the great work that we did for part 1, lays out to you accepting responsibility for your outcomes, accepting responsibility and the duty you have to yourself to be a leader and take care of your personal self. And then understanding the categories of preparedness as exist out there gets you on the journey, sets you down that roadmap, because we're coming up on part 3. And part 3 is all about your trifecta of preparedness plans. It's like, okay, I understand the CI. I understand the role of emergency management. I understand the preparedness gap. I've accepted responsibility for my outcomes. I've decided I'm going to do better in physical, mental, and financial health. I've figured out what part of the preparedness spectrum I'd like to land on. Now, what do I need to be able to do? That's the next step. That's your trifecta of preparedness plans. So thank you very much for listening again here at Inside My Canoe Head. We're here for you to provide free, non-apocalyptic, evidence-based preparedness education. Everything that we say on this podcast is backed up by evidence. It's not belief or opinion. Or if it's my opinion, I will clearly tell you that. Otherwise, what we do here is for you. It's free of charge. If you have any comments, feedbacks, reach out to us at jeff@preparednesslabs.ca. Drop over to our 2 websites. Leave us a like, comment, share, and please share this roadmap to resilience to everyone. There's no ad money. There's nothing in it for me. It's basically helping people through chaos and calamity, understanding that nobody has any money, because nothing we talk about here costs a dime. Nothing. Preparedness is free. Financial barriers to preparedness are creations of the state, and they don't exist. We're here for you. So take care, stay safe, and get ready for part 3.